It really, it's a nice feeling because it reminds you, technology's changed, but people haven't changed, you know. They still have all the little things. They gossiped, they operated, they ate together as families. So yeah, it's brilliant.
I love the immediacy of it, the physicality of it is that is how it's not degraded in the ground. That is how it would have felt to the last person who used it.
We are standing in front of one of the trenches at a Bournemouth University training excavation because every year we are obviously providing our students with archaeological training on how to excavate features, how to record them, how to understand them. Because our major research aim is trying to understand what's going on in the Iron Age, what's going on as the Roman Empire advances, because in AD 44 a Roman army sweeps through this area and all the population become part of that larger imperial system. So we're trying to get to grips with what was life like before the Romans arrived, what happened during the invasion, and how Roman did the population become once the Romans had turned this into a province. A lot of people sort of ask us, how do you know where to dig? Why are you here? Because obviously there is no surface remains. These are a series of ploughed fields which extend in many, many miles in all directions. So there's no obvious signs on the surface today about what's below ground level. But what we did, we certainly knew there was archaeology around here because every time this was being ploughed, the landowner was recovering finds. There's a whole range of material coming up. She contacted us to say would we be interested in doing any kind of archaeological work. And the first thing that we did was conduct a series of geophysical surveys. It's a way of using a series of electronic survey equipment that can really map out subsurface features. So we can go across this field and identify where there are places of interest, potential ditches or walls or pits, which means that we're not digging blind effectively. We can target our trenches across areas which look sort of potential archaeological interest. We know that the Iron Age tribe that lived here just before the Romans were called the Durotriges. We know that only because the Romans tell us. The tribe didn't write anything down. None of the tribes of Britain were literate in a modern sense. They're not writing their histories down. So we've got no sort of written testimony as to what they were like, what they did, what they felt about the Romans. The only evidence that we can get about them comes from archaeology, comes from the physical remains they left behind. What we're actually looking at here is the eastern side of an Iron Age settlement. So if you'd been here just over 2,000 years ago, this would have been quite a thriving farming community positioned on a relatively high point in the landscape. It's not defendable as such, but it is visible and it's dominating all these fields. Much of the landscape that we see in front of us now, this wouldn't have changed very much from the Iron Age. It's arable fields, field boundaries, it's farming communities. But whereas today all the farms are pretty much down in the valleys, in the Iron Age they're up on the hills, so they are dominating the land. They're effectively saying this is our land and we're situated in the middle of it.
So there is the excavation with trowels and then the large tools like mattocks, but there's also section drawing, plan drawing, prepping the features for photography because everything has to be cleaned and looking perfect. We also do sampling of every context and particularly contexts that are interesting like heavily charcoal deposits or any organic material. Things with lots of microfauna in because that can tell us if the pit was left open and little frogs and toads have jumped in, so it can tell us about the processes. So we do that. We also do a lot of the fines washing, so we do most of our processing on site. So everything that these students lift, animal bones, pottery, sometimes we have metal fines, human remains, we process on site. So that includes washing them, cataloguing them, taking extra photographs if we need to, if they're particularly important finds. And then we also do a geophysical survey. So we're looking at what is underneath the ground to prep where we might dig next year. And we also do surveying. So once the feature's finished, we use GPS and we log the outside of the feature, the depth of it, where important finds have come from, so we can make a digital map for later.
It is slightly eerie and slightly meant to be. I don't know what the word is. I'm a spinner and I weave. So when I found it, it was that instant connection going back to 2,000 years ago. Those connections happen all over this site for all different types of people. You know, just a pot, you know, with a thumbprint in it. It's so special. I know people love the finds, and they are great because it gives us an insight how people lived and what they were doing while they were here. I like the features myself. I like trying to work out how everything was. But when you find something like that, the weaving comb, yeah, it's a nice feeling because it reminds you, technology's changed, but people haven't changed, you know. They still have all the little things. They gossiped, they operated, they ate together as families. So yeah, it's brilliant.
I think when you see human remains and when you're obviously being taught about them, you're using casts of remains for teaching materials, you're seeing stuff on screen and in lectures, but there's nothing quite so emotional as being faced with somebody who's been very deliberately or some deliberately placed with respect, or sometimes deliberately placed without respect. And it's incredible because these are the people who lived here, and you can really start to put yourself into the position of those people. You can look at the landscape that's around, and even though maybe the trees weren't here, the basic landscape is still the same. You can start thinking about how they lived in these places. It becomes a very visceral experience. It sort of brings up all sorts of feelings about, sort of what were they doing, how were they buried, what were their families like, what lives they led. And by looking at the skeletons, we can work out their age, any trauma that they had, any illnesses that they had. We can see if they ate well, we can see if they were malnourished, and so there's such a lot of information that we can get from those human bones, but it's also that connection with these people who actually physically lived here, and every day, how did they get their water, how did they eat, how did they drink, all those things. And it just makes it really rewarding to be able to see this whole big picture of how life was up here, during the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age.
I was always a huge history nerd, but I'm too active to just be sitting at a desk and reading a book. So the next best thing was to genuinely get into history, physically into the history of something, standing in a pit, digging up. Because it gives you the most authentic idea of the past, is because you are simply seeing who they were, what they had, and how they made it.
I stand on the top of the spoil heap and I give my tours and I show people round. I say, this is the same view everyone that has ever been up here has really had. Take away the hedgerows, you can see to the Purbecks, Dorchester, Blandford Forum. They wouldn't have been there, but they've popped up, but you can see the landscape of everything's been. And that's kind of the landscape, and actually being here is kind of my connection with it. And that's kind of why I love archaeology and get really into it, is that you see exactly what those people would have seen.
It's just so nice to see how much care and to see how things really haven't changed much in the thousands of years that we have been saying goodbye to our loved ones, and to sit there and see this 3,000 to 4,000 years on was just absolutely spectacular.
The physical process of uncovering it was really fun because, it's about finding out the anatomy of the dog and, what's going to come next, what's there, what's not there, and trying to really carefully uncover that. It really felt like I was, finding out someone else's story there.
I love the immediacy of it, the physicality of it, is that is how it's not degraded in the ground. That is how it would have felt to the last person who used it.
I don't always feel like it's something I want to do. It's something that I feel like I need to do. And I've always felt like that. I feel very strongly about that, especially when we have sites that are prone to damage. If we don't do this, it's a weight of responsibility because things could change and then we will never know what was there before. So actually, it's a privilege to do it. But I think you feel that it's such an important weight of responsibility to tell those stories before they're lost.
I've been an archaeologist now probably for about 40 years. It is a fantastic thing to be involved in. I think it's the ultimate combination between science. We use so many different scientific techniques to analyse material, to record it and so on, and artistry, because we need to have an interpretation. You are creating a story. You are looking at the artefacts, again, which people haven't seen for thousands of years. That electric thrill of finding a bone comb or a pot or a bronze brooch, something that was important to somebody 2 millennia ago, hasn't been seen. You are the first person to unearth that. But it's all about trying to find this material and create a story. Who originally owned that? Why did they lose it? When you're finding a burial, you're thinking about the people who left that individual in the ground, who buried them, the mourners around the grave. We're looking at the bones, and we are looking at the DNA, and we're trying to create family histories there. It's such an exciting thing, and I think, from our students and from the volunteers' perspective, not just being in this lovely part of the world, but to actually be actively involved and to engage and to be the people who find that story and create, the narrative. I would really want to be doing anything else.